Prologue. A few more steps down the aisle and every eye in the cathedral would see her. Elara of Eldoria walked beneath a thick white veil, the heavy silk brushing her cheeks with every careful step. The veil had been woven from the finest thread in her mother's private collection, soft enough that it should have felt like a cloud against her skin. Instead, it felt like a prison. 600 guests filled the soaring cathedral. Nobles crowded the first rows in embroidered coats and jeweled gowns. Generals sat stiffly beside diplomats. Eldorian courtiers had come dressed in the colors of peace, while Vesperan lords wore black, silver, and deep forest green. Even curious commoners had traveled for days to witness the wedding that was supposed to end 15 years of tension between the two kingdoms. They had not come for the treaty. They had come for her face. The princess no one had ever been allowed to look upon. Whispers already rippled through the pews before Elara reached the third row. Is that her? Is that truly her? They say no one has seen her since she was a child. My sister's maid once saw her leaving the East Tower. Did she really inherit her mother's curse? No one knows. Perhaps that is why she wears the veil. Elara heard every word. She pretended she did not. Her hands trembled inside her sleeves. She curled her fingers into her palms, trying to stop the shaking. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory from that morning. Keep your chin high. Do not look frightened. Whatever happens, do not let them see you break. Elara had promised. So she kept walking. One step. Then another. The cathedral seemed impossibly large today. Its white stone pillars climbed toward a vaulted ceiling painted with golden stars. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, scattering blue and red patterns across the marble floor. Incense hung faintly in the air, mixed with roses and candle smoke. It should have been beautiful. Instead, Elara felt as though she were walking toward an execution. She and Kale, Alpha King of Vespera, had been betrothed since she was 6 years old. 15 years. 15 years of letters crossing the border. Formal letters at first. Then longer ones. Questions about books. Reports about court life. Occasional jokes. Poems. Kale had always been charming on paper. He had told her about the forests of Vespera. He had written about hunting with his cousins as a boy. He had described the first wolf he ever rode beside and the first winter he spent at the northern fortress. Elara had answered every letter. She had tried to imagine the man who wrote them. She had imagined kindness, patience, perhaps even affection. But they had never met. Never once. She had never seen his face. He had never seen hers. Until today. Now he stood waiting at the altar in full ceremonial black and silver. Tall. Striking. Perfectly groomed. His dark hair was swept back from his forehead, and the silver clasp at his throat bore the crest of Vespera's royal house. He carried himself with the confidence of a man who had spent his entire life knowing that people would look at him and see exactly what they expected to see. A king. A handsome one. The kind of man who had every right to expect beauty. Elara's stomach dropped through the stone floor. She had prayed he might be plain. It would have been easier. A plain man might understand. A man who had spent his life being judged for something other than his face might have looked at her differently. But Kale was beautiful. And he was expecting a beautiful bride. Elara swallowed. Please. The thought formed silently in her mind. Please let him be kind about it. It was a small thing to ask. Wasn't it? She did not need him to adore her. She did not even need him to find her beautiful. She only needed him not to look at her as though she were a monster. Her foot moved forward. Then another. She was so focused on the figure waiting for her at the altar that she misjudged the next step. Her ankle rolled. The delicate heel of her wedding shoe snapped with a sharp crack. The sound seemed impossibly loud. Elara's breath caught. The marble floor rushed toward her. For one terrible heartbeat, she was falling. Strong hands caught her. One closed firmly around her elbow. The other pressed flat against her back, taking her entire weight as if she weighed nothing at all. Elara gasped. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She looked up. Blue eyes met hers. They were the exact color of a clear winter sky. The man standing over her was older than Kale, taller, broad-shouldered, and built like an oak that had weathered many storms. A short, dark beard framed his jaw, a scar cut through one eyebrow, disappearing into the dark hair above it. His ceremonial coat was plain compared with Kale's, though the silver wolf clasp at his shoulder marked him unmistakably as a member of the royal family. But it was his expression that caught her attention. There was no disgust, no shock, no hesitation, only calm. His voice was a deep, steady baritone. Steady. Elara stared at him. For a moment she forgot where she was. Forgot about the 600 people watching. Forgot about the veil. Forgot about Kale. She could only feel the firm hands supporting her back. "Thank you," she whispered. The stranger's gaze dropped briefly to her broken heel. Then he looked at the path ahead. "Can you walk?" Elara nodded. "I think so." He did not laugh at her uncertainty. He did not tell her to hurry. Instead, he offered his arm. "Then let's continue slowly." She hesitated. Her mother had taught her not to accept unnecessary assistance in public. A princess must appear composed. A princess must never seem weak. But her ankle hurt, and the man had already saved her from falling. So Elara placed her trembling hand against his arm. The fabric beneath her fingers was heavy and warm. Solid. Safe. The strange thought came so suddenly that she almost pulled away. She had never felt safe beneath a veil. Not when people whispered. Not when servants lowered their voices whenever she entered a room. Not when nobles pretended not to stare. Not even when her own family told her that the curse was something she must learn to endure. Yet this stranger had caught her without asking what she looked like. He had not even tried to lift her veil. He simply helped. Together they continued toward the altar. Every step felt louder than the last. By the time they reached the front, Elara's pulse was a wild drum in her ears. The stranger released her arm. She turned slightly toward him. "Thank you," she whispered again. He inclined his head. "You're welcome, princess." He knew who she was. Of course he did. Elara's eyes lifted to his face. Something about him seemed familiar. Not personally. From stories. Then she remembered. Theron. The late king's younger brother. Kale's uncle. The man who had spent decades on battlefields instead of at court. She had heard his name many times. Theron of Vespera. The king's brother who had commanded the northern armies. The warrior nobles respected and feared. The prince who preferred soldiers and forests to banquets and court gossip. He had returned to Vespera only months ago after years along the northern border. Elara had never expected to meet him. Certainly not like this. She watched as Theron stepped back toward one of the massive cathedral pillars, partly disappearing into its shadow. For one fleeting moment, his blue eyes met hers again. Unreadable. Then he looked away. Elara turned toward Kale. He smiled. It was a dazzling smile. Perfectly practiced. A smile meant for 600 witnesses. A smile that made several ladies in the front rows whisper behind their fans. Kale reached for her hand. His fingers closed around hers. Elara's palm was cold. I can hardly wait, he announced to the cathedral, his voice carrying easily beneath the vaulted ceiling, to marry my beautiful fiancé. Elara managed a nervous laugh. Oh dear. It was even worse than she had feared. He was expecting beautiful. He was not even going to get plain. She looked down at their joined hands. Kale's thumb brushed lightly across her knuckles. For one foolish second, she wondered if perhaps he would surprise her. Perhaps the words did not matter. Perhaps kindness would matter more. Perhaps he would see her face and remember the years of letters. Perhaps he would remember every time she had written him about her favorite books, her childhood gardens, the first snow of the year. Perhaps he would see Elara before he saw the curse. She held on to that fragile hope. The priest began the ancient words of the joining. Elara barely heard them. The cathedral seemed to fade around her. The priest spoke of the two royal houses. Of peace. Of borders. Of generations yet unborn. The joining of Eldoria and Vespera. The joining of two bloodlines. The end of 15 years of uncertainty. Elara heard only the thunder of her own blood. Her hands felt cold. Her mouth was dry. The veil brushed against her cheeks whenever she breathed. The blessing of the two houses. The joining of their hands. The naming of the kingdoms. The promises. The vows. Every word brought the moment closer. Then came the veil. 21 years of hiding had led to this single moment. 21 years of doors closing. 21 years of servants instructed not to look directly at her. 21 years of physicians whispering about the curse. 21 years of wondering whether anyone would ever see her face and stay. Elara's throat tightened. The priest raised his palms. His voice filled the cathedral. Before the eyes of both kingdoms, let the veil be lifted, and let truth stand where secrecy once stood. Elara almost laughed at the cruel simplicity of the words. Truth. She had spent her entire life hiding from it. 4 beats remained. The priest spoke of peace between Eldoria and Vespera. 3. Elara squeezed her gloved hands together until the seams bit into her palms. Please. She tried to breathe. Please let him be fine with it. 2. She felt Kale's gaze on the side of her veiled face. Could he sense how hard she was shaking? Could he feel her pulse beneath his fingers? Did he know how terrified she was? 1. Kale reached out. His fingers caught the edge of the veil. Elara stopped breathing. The world seemed to shrink to that single movement. The silk lifted. Light touched her face. For one frozen instant, the world held its breath. Elara watched Kale's beautiful smile. She saw the confidence in his eyes. She saw the expectation. And desperately, foolishly, she hoped the smile might stay. Then his face changed. The warmth vanished. His eyes widened. His mouth fell open. He recoiled as if struck, taking a full step backward. One hand rose between them like a shield. 600 people inhaled at once. The sound was almost physical. A woman in the third row gasped. Someone whispered, "Oh, gods." Another voice said, "Is that?" Somewhere near the front, a child asked loudly, "What's wrong with the bride?" The child's mother shushed him, but far too late. Elara stood perfectly still. Her body seemed to have forgotten how to move, how to breathe, how to react. She had been trained for this. Chin high, shoulders straight, eyes forward. Never cry in public. Never give them the satisfaction. Never let anyone see how much their words hurt. But none of her mother's lessons had prepared her for the look on Kale's face. He stared at her as though she were something that should never have been allowed into the light. His expression twisted with disbelief. Then disgust. Then anger. No. His voice carried through the cathedral. Elara's fingers went numb. Cale shook his head. No. He took another step backward. Absolutely not. The words struck harder than any slap. A murmur swept through the pews. The silence shattered. Whispers erupted everywhere. He rejected her. In front of everyone. After the treaty. Look at her. Poor princess. Poor king. Elara heard none of it clearly. Her vision blurred. She refused to blink. If she blinked, she might cry. And if she cried, 600 people would watch the cursed princess fall apart at the altar. So she stood. Perfectly still. Chin high. Exactly as her mother had commanded. But beneath the layers of silk and lace, her hands were shaking. The treaty had brought 600 people here. The wedding had been meant to seal 15 years of peace. Her parents had told her that morning that the future of 2 kingdoms rested on her shoulders. She had believed them. Now she wondered whether the entire weight of those kingdoms was about to crush her. Cale looked toward the priest. Then toward the council. Then back at Elara. His face hardened. There was no trace of the charming man from his letters. No trace of the prince who had written poems about moonlit forests. No trace of the man who had once promised that their wedding would be the beginning of a beautiful new era. Only rejection remained. Behind Elara, the heavy side chamber door waited. 6 people would walk through it in the next minute. Her father. Her mother. Cale. Theron. The Vesperin counselor. And the priest who had just watched a peace treaty shatter in front of him. Elara drew one slow breath. The cathedral doors remained closed. The whispers grew louder. Theron had returned to the shadows beside the pillar. But unlike everyone else, he was not staring at her face. His eyes were fixed on Cale. And there was something in his expression that Elara could not yet understand. The side chamber door opened. Her father's voice was low and urgent. Elara, now. She turned. For 21 years, she had believed the worst moment of her life would be the day someone finally saw her. She was wrong. The worst moment had come afterward. Because now everyone had seen her. And behind that closed door, the fate of 2 kingdoms and the rest of her life would depend on what one man said next. Chapter 1. The side chamber door closed with a heavy finality that shut out the cathedral's chaos. 6 people stood inside the smaller room. The air felt thinner here, thick with incense that had drifted in from the main hall and the sharper scent of polished wood and old stone. A single high window let in a slant of afternoon light. Dust motes floated through it like slow-falling ash. Elara stood near the wall, hands still clasped tightly in front of her. The broken heel of her shoe made her stance uneven. She did not shift her weight, she barely breathed. Her parents faced Cale. Theron remained near the window, blue eyes watchful, arms loose at his sides. A Vesperin counselor hovered by the door as if uncertain whether he was still needed. Cale's voice broke the silence first. Your Majesty has to marry her, Elara's mother said, the words tight with barely controlled urgency. This marriage has practically been arranged since your birth. Cale laughed once, short, sharp, ugly. Don't be ridiculous. If I'd known she looked like this, I would have broken the arrangement years ago. Elara flinched. The movement was small, but Theron's gaze flicked to her for half a second before returning to his nephew. She turned her face slightly and caught her own reflection in a narrow mirror hanging on the far wall. The sight still startled her, even after 21 years. Gray-green skin the color of sickly moss, rough as tree bark in places. Deep lines carved across her forehead and around her mouth. A heavy jaw, a flat nose, a low forehead that jutted forward. Spots scattered across her cheeks like dark freckles gone wrong. She looked away quickly. She's hideous, Cale continued, voice rising. How is that supposed to make me look if I marry ya? Enough. Theron's voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a blade. His eyes met Elara's briefly in the mirror before he spoke again. May I remind you, Kale, that a peace treaty was signed between our kingdoms on the understanding that their princess would marry our future king. Precisely, Elara's mother said, stepping forward. The treaty. Oh, come on, Kale threw out a hand. I'm all for peace, but they clearly haven't been honest with us, have they? I always wondered why I was never allowed to meet my future wife in person. Now I know. You kept her hidden so I wouldn't find out. Elara's father looked away, uncomfortable. Guilt sat heavy on his shoulders. Elara thought of the closed shutters of her childhood, the tutors sworn to secrecy, the constant warnings, no one can see you, no one can know about your curse. If you ever want to break it, it must remain a secret. They had not been protecting her from the world, they had been protecting the betrothal. Theron spoke again, still calm. Nephew, you are insulting an allied kingdom and its rulers. Worse, you are insulting the princess, your bride-to-be. Kale's lip curled. Oh no, she is not my bride-to-be. I said no, didn't I? The wedding is void. Elara's father straightened. Then the treaty is over. Father, Elara's voice came out softer than she intended. Her father did not want another war. She knew that, but forcing Kale to marry her would only give her a husband who hated her for the rest of their lives. Hate would never break the curse. Theron sighed. Nephew, you are the king, your duty. Easy for you to say, Kale's finger stabbed toward Elara. You're not the one who'd have to share a bed with that. The room went silent. Elara lifted her chin. The movement cost her. Every instinct screamed to shrink, to hide, to disappear into the wall. Instead, she met Kale's eyes directly. Your Majesty, she said, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands, while I understand my appearance may come as a shock, it is beneath a king to speak of a crowned princess as though she were a beast. Kale blinked. For the first time he looked genuinely startled, as if no one had ever told him he was wrong in his life. Near the window, Theron's blue eyes sparked with something that might have been quiet amusement before he turned his attention back to his nephew. The treaty is clear, Theron said. If peace is to hold, then the Alpha King of Vespera must marry the Princess of Eldoria. Kale clapped sarcastically. Yes, yes, the great general, my father's brother, always so full of duty. Theron ignored the jibe. The treaty stands. Everyone in the room looked at Kale. He pouted like a child denied a toy. Fine, if the king has to marry her, then fine. Elara's mother released a loud, shaky breath. Her father crossed the room and clapped Kale on the back as though the matter were settled. Elara watched them with a strange, hollow detachment. Not one of them had asked how she felt. They had spent the last 15 minutes arguing about whether Kale could be forced to endure her face, and not one person had considered that she might not want him either. She knew what she looked like. Being cursed did not give Kale the right to be cruel, and now, after hearing him, she did not want him either. Theron started to speak again. Nephew, I'm glad you've come to your... Let it be known that I abdicate my crown, Kale declared. No one spoke. Then Theron said very quietly, you cannot be serious. Oh, I'm very serious, Kale smiled, wide and reckless. My father is dead, which means the crown passes to... He put his fists to his lips and made exaggerated trumpet sounds. His brother, congratulations, uncle. You're the next king. He crossed the room and slapped Theron on the back, copying the gesture Elara's father had just used on him. Enjoy your blissful union with your lovely wife. And with that, the former king of Vespera walked out the door, leaving them all in stunned silence. The private wedding took place that same afternoon in a small chapel with only 9 witnesses. No cathedral, no 3-day feast, no 600 staring eyes. The vows were short. When Theron said, I do, he looked directly into Elara's eyes and did not look away. She counted that as a small, fragile win. Later, as they prepared to board the traditional carriage that would carry them through the capital, Elara's nerves returned in a rush. At the chapel door, she could already hear the huge crowd waiting outside. She wondered how many of them were ready to throw tomatoes at their new, ugly queen. Theron reached over and gently pulled her veil down so it covered her face completely. Your Majesty, Elara said, that's not how it's usually done. The bride is supposed to be seen. People will talk. People always do, he answered, offering his arm with a small, quiet smile. We might as well keep them guessing. She looked down, embarrassed by the unexpected consideration. No one else ever looked at her so directly without flinching. She took his arm. They rode through the capital of Vespera with her face hidden. She waved with a hand kept carefully inside her sleeve. The people cheered for a woman they could not see. No tomatoes were thrown. By the time the carriage rolled back through the palace gates, the light across the courtyard had turned a deep, warning yellow. Elara's chest tightened. Not long now until sunset. She had to reach her rooms before night fell. Or people would see the other half of her curse. And her new husband still had no idea what walked beside him after dark. Chapter 2. The reception hall of the Vesperan palace blazed with light and forced celebration. Elara stood at Theron's side near the high dais, veil still drawn completely over her face. Courtiers pressed forward in waves, offering congratulations that never quite reached their eyes. Every smile was too wide. Every glance lingered a fraction too long on the veil, as if hoping it might slip. The air smelled of roasted meats, sweet wine, and too many competing perfumes. Beneath it all, Elara could feel the weight of their curiosity like a physical pressure against her skin. She smiled and nodded and answered politely when spoken to. Inside, she counted the light. Yellow had already begun to deepen toward amber across the far windows. Sunset was coming. The second half of her curse waited for the last ray of sun to die. If she was still standing in this hall when night fell, everyone would see what she became after dark, including her new husband. Her calm began to crack. Theron must have sensed something. He leaned slightly closer, voice low enough that only she could hear. You needn't stay, you will have all the time in the world to know them. Go and rest for now. Relief flooded her so sharply she almost swayed. He thought she was overwhelmed by the staring and the noise. She did not correct him. She simply curtsied and turned to Lave. Cousin. Lyra's voice cut through the crowd like a silver blade. Elara's cousin swept forward with 4 noblewomen trailing behind her, each more beautifully dressed than the last. For one foolish second Elara's heart lifted, a familiar face. Someone who had stood up for her, however briefly, the day before. Lyra kissed the air beside Elara's veiled cheek. Welcome to Vespera, your majesty. You must let me show you everything. The gardens, the summer wing, all of it. You're very kind, Elara answered, watching the light on the far wall turn from amber to the first flush of red. Lyra's voice dropped, sweet and confidential. We were all so terribly sorry about the cathedral. Kale can be so dreadfully impulsive. Behind her, one of the women murmured something about the veil during the procession. Another laughed softly. A mercy for all concerned, do you not think? Lyra made a disapproving sound, though her eyes glittered. Don't be unkind, it's hardly poor Elara's fault she was born looking like that. The women looked down, pretending embarrassment. Elara said nothing. The red on the wall was climbing higher. Time was running out. Do say you'll come, Lyra continued. Tomorrow, perhaps. Forgive me, Elara's hand was shaking openly now. She no longer cared who saw it. I really must, I feel suddenly unwell. She did not wait for permission. Queens, she was learning, did not need to be excused. Lifting her skirts, she pushed through the crowd toward the nearest exit. The light on the walls was fading from red to something weaker, more dangerous. She was almost free when she collided with a solid chest. Theron. Elara, what's wrong? Have those ladies been unkind? She shook her head. There was no time. She could already feel the coolness of the dying light against her skin. Forgive me, your majesty, forgive me. She left him standing there and fled up the stairs 2 at a time, wedding dress clutched high. Stupid curse, stupid, stupid curse. She reached her rooms with barely any light left under the door. She sent the maids away with a half-panicked order and slammed the door behind them. Not a moment too soon. The final rays died. It began the way it always did, behind her eyes first, then her hands, bones swelling, knuckles grinding. Her jaw shifted with a deep internal ache. Her scalp crawled as hair lengthened and darkened. She stood in the center of the floor with fists clenched and teeth locked, waiting for it to finish. Less than a minute as always, then it was done. The room was dark. She had changed. Slowly she opened her hands and touched her face. Smooth skin, fine bones, the face no one was ever meant to see by daylight. She sat on the edge of the bed and let out a long, shaking breath that had been far too close. A knock interrupted the quiet. Your Majesty, I've come to prepare you for the wedding night. Ice slid down Elara's spine. Of course, the wedding night. She had been so focused on surviving the sunset that she had forgotten what came after. A husband would be expected. The court would expect proof. I don't require you, she told the maid, buying seconds. Footsteps sounded in the hallway, attendants' voices announcing the king's arrival. The door began to open. Elara's eyes landed on the 3-paneled folding screen near the window, painted silk, tall enough to hide her completely. She darted behind it just as the door swung wide. "My lady," Theron's voice quieter than she expected, "are you all right?" "Yes," she pressed her back to the panel. "I'm fine, I'm just getting ready." Another voice, brisk and official, spoke from the doorway. "Your Majesties should hurry. The court will soon arrive to witness the consummation." Elara's stomach dropped. Theron's reply was calm but firm. "Perhaps we could skip that particular tradition. Your Majesty, it is customary, the late king and queen." "The late king courted his mate for months," Theron interrupted. "My wife has barely had time to adjust to any of this." A pause. "Thank you, that will be all." The door closed, the hallway emptied. Behind the painted screen, Elara realized she was shaking. "Are you all right?" Theron asked again, quieter now. "Yes." There was the soft creak of a man sitting down in a chair somewhere on the other side of the screen. "My lady, you don't have to be afraid. I will never force you." "I'm not afraid," she lied. "Then would you come out?" She said nothing. She could not risk him seeing her like this, and she could not think of a single good excuse. The silence stretched. "Just as I thought," Theron said gently. "You don't have to explain, I understand." Guilt twisted in her chest. "I'm sorry." "Don't be, I'll leave you to rest." But he did not move. After a few moments she said, almost without meaning to, "You're still here." He gave a short, low laugh, different from anything she had heard from him before. "If I leave immediately, it may arouse suspicion." Another silence, less sharp this time. He was her husband. She supposed she should try to speak to him. How was he ever to fall in love with her if she remained a voice behind a screen? "Are you happy to be king?" she asked. "It's rather unexpected," he replied. The candle on his side of the room flickered. After a moment he added, quieter, "I truly am sorry for how my nephew behaved." Elara sighed. Who could blame him? He was expecting someone different. They sat there on either side of the painted silk, two strangers bound by a treaty and a crown neither of them had wanted. For the first time that day, Elara felt something close to comfort. At last Theron stood. "I think it's safe for me to leave now. Good night, my lady." She heard him move toward the door. "Your Majesty." He waited. "Thank you." The pause that followed was long enough that she wondered if he had already gone. Then his voice came, low and steady. "You have nothing to thank me for." The door closed, his footsteps faded down the hallway. Elara remained behind the screen in the dark, her secret safe for one more night. He had been kind. She had not expected that. Or perhaps he had simply chosen not to look at what he was glad not to see. She sat on the edge of the bed, unseen and oddly disappointed, and understood two dangerous truths at once. Her husband was kinder than she had dared to hope. And if he ever saw her night form, the curse could never break. Chapter 3. Morning light poured through the tall windows of the great hall, cold and unforgiving. Elara stood beside Theron as the nobles of Vespera were presented to their new queen. After a night of careful practice, most of them hid their disgust well enough. Smiles were polite, bows were deep. But the words, the whispers, floated freely through the court the moment anyone believed she was out of earshot. No wonder he wouldn't have her. Kale was our true king, he was ours, and she made him give up the throne with her ugliness. The last comment was repeated more times than she could count. By the time the formal presentations ended, Elara understood the shape of the court's opinion. Roughly half of them believed she had deliberately driven Kale away from the start. The other half simply stared and waited for her to prove them right. She kept her chin high, she answered every question with careful courtesy, she never let her expression crack. Weakness would only feed them. Her goal was simple and absolute. Theron had to love her in daylight, that was all that mattered. Breaking the curse, the court's cruelty could wait. Still, the words hurt. When she was finally allowed to retreat, she wanted only one thing, a kind word, someone who might stand on her side. Lyra had lived at court since she was 16. She knew every family. She had openly defended Elara, however briefly, the day before. She was the closest thing to a possible friend Elara could imagine. After being told her cousin might be in the library, Elara walked the long corridor with her heart cautiously hopeful. The library of the Vesperin Palace was vast and intimidating, shelves rising into shadow, the air thick with old paper and wood smoke. She made her way toward the lit fireplace at the far end, then stopped cold when she heard voices through the shelves. "Told you it would sort itself out," Kale said. Elara held her breath. Lyra's laugh was soft and delighted. "I nearly fell out of my chair. I didn't know you were going to do it until you'd done it." "I didn't know either," Kale admitted. There was the unmistakable sound of movement, of fabric, of two people who no longer needed to hide. Months of sneaking around, and now I don't need to sneak at all. Elara looked between a narrow gap in the shelves. She saw them wrapped around each other, clearly kissing. Kale pulled back just enough to keep talking, grinning. "Your poor uncle." Lyra giggled. "My poor uncle got a kingdom out of it." Kale snorted. "He can have the ogre as well, and good luck to him." Lyra's laugh rang out again while Elara stood frozen, staring. Months. They had been carrying on for months. She had never even met Kale until the day of the wedding, yet the betrayal still landed like a blow she had not expected. She gritted her teeth, turned, and walked out quietly. Neither of them heard her leave. She got as far as the second hallway before she walked straight into Theron. This was becoming a habit. "My lady," he frowned, studying her face. "You look pale. Did something happen?" "I'm quite well," she said, though the words felt thin. He watched her a moment longer. Two courtiers appeared at the far end of the corridor. Theron's expression closed. "We'll speak later," he said, and stepped aside. That night she barely made it behind the painted screen before the attendants finished announcing the king's entrance. She sat on the chair with her back straight and her hands folded, knowing he could probably see her shadow against the silk. "You could come out," Theron said, "if you wanted to." "I'd rather not," she admitted. He did not ask twice. There was the familiar creak of the same chair being taken in the same place. "Now," he said quietly, "what happened this afternoon?" Heat rose in her face. Truly, it was nothing. "My lady, we're married. If somebody in my house has hurt you, I would like to know who so I can do something about it." Elara bit her lip. Normally she might have stayed silent, but after a full day of court whispers and the discovery in the library, the need to speak to someone, anyone, won. So she told him everything, the library, the months-long affair, the way Kale had called her the ogre and laughed. Theron was quiet for a long moment. "I can't say I'm surprised," he admitted at last. "I knew her family. They've been climbing for 2 generations and they're good at it. You were out of sight for years. They jumped on the opportunity. If Kale had married a member of your family, your father could hardly have objected without putting the treaty at risk. It was smart." He paused. When he spoke again, there was an edge in his voice that was not quite anger. "Kale was a fool, though. He could have broken things off with you and pretended it was about Lyra. He didn't even think of doing that, the impulsive fool." Elara stared at the painted silk. "Are you happy to be king?" He had given her a similar answer the night before. "I never expected it." "But are you happy?" The silence stretched so long she thought he might not answer. "It is my duty," he said finally. No, then, he had not wanted the throne. More than likely, he had not wanted the bride that came with it either. "Something's wrong," he said suddenly. "Nothing's wrong. My lady, I can smell that you're sad." Elara's head came up. "You can smell sadness." "Yes," he sounded almost apologetic. "Wolves' senses are sharper than yours, scent especially. It's how we know most things about each other. I wouldn't have mentioned it, but you would have kept saying you were fine and we'd have been here all night." 21 years she had trained herself to show no emotion. Here in Vespera, among a kingdom of shifters, her scent gave everything away. "Anyway," Theron continued, quieter, "I am sorry. You were promised a king with a solid line and a settled court. What you got is a soldier who's held the crown for a few days and may not hold it much longer." Elara frowned at the silk. "You don't think you'll keep it?" "I think a great many people would prefer I didn't." She spoke before she could stop herself. "I think you'll make a better king than Kale would have been." A disbelieving chuckle came from the other side of the screen. "I'm not sure the court sees it that way. Half those families spent years positioning themselves around my nephew's reign, engagements, debts, political favors. Kale set fire to all of it in one afternoon. The people standing in the ashes are now looking at me, wondering where all their promises went." Elara sat very still, taking that in. Since the wedding she had believed he was uneasy because of her. Now she understood it was larger than that. He had a restless court, a fragile treaty, and a throne that looked far less stable than it had first appeared. With all of that weighing on him, how would he ever find the time or the heart to fall in love with his new wife? Chapter 4. The corridor outside the eastern gallery was quiet enough that the two men's voices carried clearly. Elara had been on her way back from the small solar where she had spent the morning pretending to embroider. She stopped at the corner when she heard them, pressing herself lightly against the stone. "There's no sign," the first man said, "no prospect of an heir." "There's been a wedding," the second argued. "There's been a ceremony, it's not the same thing and the whole court knows it. Ask the maids, ask anyone, he goes to her room, he sits, he comes out again, they do nothing." Elara's heart began to pound. "Perhaps he's being patient. Perhaps he's being smart, would you?" The other man laughed hard. "Well, whatever's keeping him from the monster, he'd better get going, otherwise there'll be bloodshed, mark my words." "What do you mean by that?" the first whispered. "Oh, you know this place isn't for the faint-hearted. The court is growing restless." Their footsteps moved off toward the stairs. Elara remained where she was until the corridor was empty again. Then she walked back to her rooms on unsteady legs and sat heavily on the edge of the bed. The court is growing restless. The throne had been dumped on Theron whether he wanted it or not, and the one thing that would have made him and the Alliance safer was exactly what she had been keeping from him for the past 2 weeks. An heir, the announcement of a pregnancy. Her heart hammered at the thought. For a pregnancy to occur, certain things would have to happen first, and would her husband even be amenable? It had to be done in daylight. To break the curse, everything always had to be in daylight, and she looked hideous in daylight. That said, if she thought carefully about it, Theron had never looked at her with disgust. Not even once. His eyes were warm, kind, beautiful, even though she would never say it aloud. Gathering what courage she had left, she sent him a short note asking if that afternoon she might see him privately in his chambers. The act of making an heir would, if anything, bring them closer, she told herself, not just emotionally. She would feel his skin against hers, his large hands on her waist or in her hair. Heat crept up her neck. She found herself pressing her knees together. She would learn what he looked like when he lost control, what sounds he made, how he tasted. And afterward, in the warmth and intimacy of it, he might come to love her. Wasn't that what she needed to break the curse? Or, she thought a beat later, he might be disgusted. She waited for the reply, thinking of his hands, the way they moved when he gestured during their talks, efficient and sure. Would they be gentle? Would they hesitate? His answer came within the hour, a single sentence. "Of course, my lady." When the hour arrived, her hands would not stop shaking. She imagined walking into his chambers. She imagined him standing, that broad frame unfolding from the chair. Would his eyes darken? Would he reach for her immediately, or would he be patient, drawing it out until she was dizzy with wanting? Her face burned. Just as she was about to leave, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the mirror and her fragile courage faltered. Who could possibly want this? Even the kindest person in the world would not want this. Not truly. She very nearly stayed. She stood with her fingers on the door and thought about writing another note, claiming a headache, letting the whole thing drop. He has never looked at me with disgust, not once. She steeled herself, lifted her chin, and left the chamber. The walk to his rooms felt endless. Every step brought a fresh wave of heat to her face, her neck, her chest. By the time she reached his door, her entire body felt like it was on fire. Theron stood when she entered. The sight of him made her stomach swoop. "What can I do for you?" She could not quite catch her breath, not when she could see the pulse beating in his throat, strong and steady. "It has come to my attention." Her voice came out softer than usual, breathier. He took a step closer. "Yes." She forced herself to meet his eyes. "Your Majesty mentioned that your rule may not be very secure." His face changed at once. Concern replaced whatever had been building between them. "Please don't concern yourself with that." Elara cleared her throat. "I thought perhaps I could help." "Help?" He frowned, uncertainty creeping into his expression. "Well, I thought perhaps if we were to produce an heir." She let the suggestion hang in the air, heart racing with equal parts nervousness and want. "An heir?" His voice had gone flat. She pushed forward. "If we were to attempt." She took a small step toward him. "To conceive." Attempt. He did not move, did not reach for her. She made herself say it, made herself offer. "I believe we should consummate our marriage." Theron blinked. The silence stretched and stretched. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She watched his face, waiting for his expression to change, waiting for desire to flare in those beautiful eyes. But he did not move. He did not look pleased with the suggestion or relieved. He simply looked uncomfortable. "My lady." The heat in her body turned cold. "Forget I said anything." She turned on her heel, mortification flooding through her. "I don't wish to force you," he said hurriedly. She whirled back. "I offered." Regret crossed his face. He took a moment before he answered, and when he did he sounded genuinely sorry. "Yes, you did." He seemed to be searching for the right words. "I simply think we have time. We don't need to try now. There's no pressure from me." The rejection felt like a slap, all that anticipation, and he did not want any of it, did not want her. She searched his face desperately for any sign that she had misread him, but there was nothing. She nodded once, not trusting herself to speak, and left. He called after her from the doorway, but she marched away with her chin high, past 2 footmen and a maid, and shut her own door behind her. She got as far as the end of the bed before collapsing onto it. The humiliation came first, then the disappointment, deep and aching, a physical hurt in her chest. She had let herself want him. Had let herself imagine his hands on her. Had let herself believe he might want her too. She had been wrong. He was patient, he was good. He was also a man who had just refused his own wife when she offered herself to him. He would never love her, the curse would never break. She would go on transforming every sunset and sunrise, married to a good man who would be kind to her for the rest of her life and never once desire her. 3 days of silence followed. She did not open her door when he came at night. She answered his notes with the barest courtesy. The distance between them grew heavier with every hour. On the 4th morning, a messenger arrived with an invitation written in Cale's flowery hand. His birthday celebration at his private estate. The entire court was expected. Theron wanted to decline. Elara knew refusing would look like fear, so she convinced him otherwise. They left that afternoon. Neither spoke. Both were lost in their own thoughts, the silence broken only by the rocking of the carriage. Nearly an hour passed that way. At last Theron spoke, voice careful. "I wonder what he's playing at. He's given up a crown and lost half his allies in 2 weeks, and now he wants the whole court watching him celebrate." Elara said nothing. "Elara," he leaned forward slightly, "would you look at me, please?" She turned and met those blue eyes, then immediately regretted it. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I'm fine." "You're not. You haven't spoken to me in 3 days. You won't open your door." He stopped, ran a hand through his hair, clearly struggling. "I've upset you. I know I handled things poorly. That afternoon I didn't mean to." The silence that followed was suffocating. She could feel him staring at her, could practically hear him searching for the right words and failing. "I never meant to hurt you," he said quietly. She said nothing because what was there to say? He had not meant to, but he had, and his regret would not free her from her curse or her hurt. The carriage rolled on, neither spoke again. Somewhere ahead waited Cale's estate, Lyra's smile, and a glass of wine that would change everything. Chapter 5. Cale's private estate was a riot of color and forced laughter. Ribbons fluttered from every tree, tables overflowed with food and wine, guests moved in bright clusters across the lawn, their voices too loud, their smiles too sharp. Cale himself circulated from group to group, laughing harder than anyone, as if volume alone could prove how happy he was without a crown. Their arrival had been announced at the garden steps. Heads turned, voices dropped, unease rippled across the grass like wind through wheat. Theron offered his arm, Elara walked past it. She felt him fall into step behind her, close enough to be seen as her husband, far enough to give her space. She knew how it looked, she no longer cared. "Cousin." Lyra appeared from the crowd with a glass in each hand, dressed in something the color of ripe berries and wearing the biggest smile Elara had ever seen. That smile felt like a knife. "How are you enjoying court?" Lyra asked sweetly. "Fine." Elara took the offered glass without thinking. Lyra tilted her head. Even with such an unexpected husband, a man so much older and so serious, it must be hard to adjust. Something hot flared in Elara's chest, hurt and anger tangled together. "I'd rather have an unexpected husband than a husband with an unexpected mistress." Lyra's smile stayed fixed, but something sharp flashed in her eyes. Elara lifted the glass toward her lips. "Don't drink that." Theron's voice was low and hard at her shoulder. Elara did not look at him. 3 days of being managed, refused, and quietly pitied had worn her patience thin. Out of pure, tired spite, her hand kept moving. Theron's hand shot out and knocked the glass away. It flew from her fingers, the liquid splashed across his skin before the glass shattered on the stone, dark droplets spattered his sleeve. Elara gasped and spun toward him, ready to unleash 3 days of hurt. Then she saw his face change. He looked down at his hand, at the liquid running over his skin. His eyes widened slightly, just for a moment, before his expression went carefully blank. Theron. His knees folded, the rest of him went down after, like a felled tree, into the grass. A woman screamed, glass shattered somewhere behind them. The entire party surged, half the guests rushing forward, half recoiling. Voices climbed over one another, calling for a physician, for water, for the guard. Elara was on her knees before she knew she had moved. Theron. His eyes were open, staring at nothing. Theron, she grabbed his face with both hands, shaking him gently. His eyes were glazed. Someone shouted the word that turned her blood to ice. Poison. Only moments ago she had been refusing his arm, ignoring his attempts to talk to her. Now the man who had shown her more kindness than anyone was dying in front of her. They carried him inside. 2 guards hefted his unconscious body between them. Outside, the party erupted into full chaos, guests screaming, guards shouting orders, servants running in every direction. Kale appeared in the doorway, face dark with fury. Seal the grounds, he barked at the nearest guard. No one leaves, search everyone, find out who did this. His anger surprised her, but she had no time to think about it. Theron was laid on a bed in one of the guest rooms, his skin already burned with fever. His breathing was shallow and labored. The royal healer, a thin, sharp-eyed woman, set to work at once, unwrapping his hand and examining the place where the liquid had touched. Poison, she muttered, already mixing something in a small bowl, but I've never seen one work this fast through contact alone. She applied a thick paste with a brush and wrapped the hand carefully. Keep him cool, try to keep him conscious if you can. Elara grabbed a cloth, dipped it in cold water and pressed it to his forehead. His skin was scorching. You shouldn't have done that, she whispered. You shouldn't have touched that cup, her voice broke. It was meant for me, not you. Theron groaned, body shifting restlessly. She leaned closer. Can you hear me, Your Majesty? His eyes flickered open. He tried to smile, then they closed again. No, Elara's hand tightened on his. Stay with me, please. The hours crawled. She refused to leave. She kept replacing the cloth, kept speaking to him even when he did not respond. Healers came and went throughout the day, trying one remedy after another. Nothing worked for long. As evening approached and the sun began to sink toward the horizon, Kale entered. Elara looked up immediately. Any news? Not yet. His jaw was tight, but I'll find whoever did this, you have my word. He looked at Theron, expression unreadable. How is he? Not well, she lowered her eyes. The poison was meant for me. Kale did not deny it. It would appear so. He hesitated. I'm sorry, Your Majesty. Elara glanced toward the window. The sun was nearly touching the horizon. Panic flared hard and bright in her chest. She stood abruptly. I want no one coming near him tonight. Kale frowned. Your Majesty. Tell the healers to leave whatever medicines they prepare outside the door. I'll care for him myself. But I'm his wife, she looked back at Theron, and this kingdom's queen. I don't know who I can trust right now. I'd rather people stop coming and going through this room. Kale hesitated, then nodded slowly. Very well. She locked the door behind him. The last rays of sunlight disappeared through the window. The familiar pull began. Elara felt her bones shift, her skin smooth, her hair lengthen and darken. She did not look at her reflection in the darkened glass. She never did. It was still too hard. She turned back to Theron. Near midnight his breathing grew so labored that she was certain she was watching him die. She pressed her hand to his chest and felt his heartbeat stuttering beneath her palm. Don't, she whispered, please don't. She stayed beside him, hand over his heart, while the second half of her curse stood fully visible in the darkened room, and prayed that somehow, he would still be breathing when the sun rose. Chapter 6. 7 days blurred into one long, exhausting vigil. Elara never left the bedside for more than a few minutes. She fed him medicine when the healers left it outside the door. She cooled his fever when it spiked. She spoke to him even when he gave no answer. Occasionally Theron woke for a few scattered moments. Each time his eyes found her and something like relief crossed his face before exhaustion pulled him under again. She stopped noticing the passage of time. Day and night became the same narrow routine, tend to him, speak to him, wait for him to wake. So the next time he opened his eyes, she did not immediately realize it was the middle of the night. His gaze was unfocused at first, then it found her. Elara had barely slept, her body ached from hours in the chair. She leaned forward, voice soft with exhaustion and hope. "You're awake." He stared at her, confusion tightened his brow. That was when she remembered, and her breath caught hard in her throat. It was night time. She was changed. He was looking at her other form. "Where is my wife?" he asked. Relief flooded through her so fast her knees nearly gave out. He did not recognize her. He did not even connect this face with the Elara he knew. The relief lasted only a heartbeat. Because Theron was suddenly trying to sit up, movements frantic and weak. "Where is she?" His breath quickened. Did something happen? "Your Majesty, please." Elara moved to support him. "You need to lie down." He did not listen. He tried to push past her. "Elara is in danger," he coughed, struggling to rise. They tried to. His body gave out. He collapsed back onto the bed, chest heaving. "Where is she?" he asked, already losing consciousness again. "Please." Something cracked open inside Elara's chest. He was poisoned, barely conscious, and still the only thing he asked for was her safety. She took his hand gently. "Your wife is safe," she whispered. "I promise, please, you must rest." His eyes were already closing. "Please check on Elara, ask Kale to." The sentence never finished. Elara sat there holding his hand, staring at his face in the dark. He had been worried about her. The realization settled deep and warm and aching beneath her ribs. The next time he woke, it was midday. Sunlight streamed through the window. Elara was back in the form he recognized, the one that made people uncomfortable, the one that made them look away. The moment his eyes opened and found her, he visibly relaxed. "You're safe," he breathed. She smiled softly. "Please rest, don't worry about me." "I couldn't protect you," he murmured, troubled. "But you did." She glanced at the bandaged hand. "You protected me and you were hurt because of it." Her voice caught. "I'm so sorry, this is all my fault." Theron slowly shook his head. "Not your fault," he murmured, eyes already closing again. And then Elara felt something that was not hers. Pain sharp and throbbing in her own hand, even though her hand was fine. Confusion, a heavy fog pressing down on her thoughts, then relief, immense, overwhelming relief that she was safe. The emotions vanished as quickly as they had appeared. Theron's grip loosened as sleep took him. The strange feeling disappeared with it. Elara stared at their joined hands, heart pounding. What just happened? She looked at his face, peaceful now in sleep, and felt something shift inside her chest. She had been so angry at him, so hurt, so convinced he only pitied her, but he had knocked poison from her hand without hesitation. He had been more worried about her safety than his own life, and somehow just now she had felt what he was feeling. She did not understand it. Theron's fever finally broke on the 7th day. Survival, however, came with its own cruel price. The poison had damaged something deep. He could not stand, he could not shift. They did not know if he would ever manage either again. For a soldier, a wolf, and an alpha king, the loss was unbearable. He tried not to show it. He thanked the healers politely. He made no complaint when servants had to lift him from bed to chair. But Elara saw the way his jaw tightened when someone touched him, the way he avoided looking at his own legs. He felt trapped inside his weakened body. 3 days after the fever broke, Kale came to speak with them. He found them in Theron's room, Elara reading aloud while Theron rested against the pillows. "I've been thinking about the attempt on the Queen's life," Kale said. Elara set down her book. "We still don't know who was responsible," he continued. "The court is unstable. Another attempt could threaten not only you both but the entire kingdom." "What are you suggesting?" Theron asked. "A temporary withdrawal while you recover, somewhere away from court." Elara's heart leapt. "My family's estate," she said immediately, turning to Theron. "The one where I was raised, Willowmere, it's isolated, peaceful." Theron frowned. "The Queen is still in danger," Kale said quietly. "The poison was meant for her." Theron went still. Elara watched his expression shift, frustration giving way to protectiveness. "Very well," he agreed. They left within the week. Theron sat rigidly in the carriage, jaw tight every time they hit a bump in the road. For most of the journey he was unusually quiet. Then, as the familiar trees of Willowmere began to appear through the window, he spoke. "I am sorry." Elara looked at him. "For what?" He glanced toward his legs briefly, as if the sight itself pained him. You can't possibly be happy with a husband who may never walk again. Her chest tightened at the way he spoke of himself. And how can you be happy, she argued softly, married to a cursed wife? Theron's eyes snapped up, cursed. Elara froze, she had said too much. What did you mean? His voice was gentle but insistent. She looked away. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say more, it could prevent it from breaking. He studied her for a long moment. She could see him weighing whether to press further. Finally he nodded. All right. Relief washed through her as he simply accepted the boundary despite his clear curiosity. Most people would not have, and she knew it. The estate appeared through the trees as the sun began its slow descent. To anyone else this might have looked like exile from court. To Elara it was home, the only place she had ever felt safe. As the carriage rolled to a stop, Theron was staring out the window at the sprawling house and the slightly wild gardens. It's lovely, he said quietly. It was my refuge, Elara answered. I hope it can be yours too. She did not say the rest aloud, that somewhere inside those walls between daylight and darkness the truth of her curse still waited, and that the man beside her had just chosen, once again, not to force it from her. Chapter 7. It took the carpenter 3 full days to finish the chair. When it was finally wheeled into Theron's room, sturdy oak, large wheels he could manage himself, handles at the back so someone else could push if needed, he stared at it for a long time without speaking. What is this? He asked at last. Elara stood beside it, hands folded tightly to keep them from fidgeting. A way for you to leave your room. I thought we could go outside. I could show you the gardens. His expression was unreadable, then it softened. All right. The days that followed became the happiest Elara had known in years. Every morning she helped him into the chair and pushed him through the slightly wild gardens of Willowmere. She showed him the hidden paths she had discovered as a child, the pond where she used to catch frogs, the old oak she had once tried to climb and gotten stuck in for an entire afternoon. They had picnics beneath the trees. She would spread a blanket and help him settle against a trunk. Theron told her about growing up as the second son who never expected a crown. She told him about the isolation of her childhood, the closed shutters, the tutors sworn to secrecy, the long stretches of silence. They were nearly inseparable. The easy rhythm they had once built behind the painted screen carried into broad daylight, and nothing was lost for the change. If anything, it was better. Now she could watch his eyes crinkle at the corners when he laughed. You're doing it again, she said one afternoon. Doing what? Pursing your lips. You always do it before you say something you don't quite believe. Theron dropped his hand and stared at her. You watch me too closely, he said softly. Somebody has too. She laughed and passed him a cup. Their fingers brushed. Heat went through her, a sudden, sharp breathlessness and something that felt almost like the anxiety she used to feel when they were apart. Then Theron drew his hand back and the feeling vanished. Elara stared at him. She told herself she had imagined it. A few days later he surprised her. You told me once that you were cursed. She went still. She had known they would eventually circle back to this. She licked her lips. I did. You don't have to tell me. He was watching the trees, but I'd like to know who did that to you. She was quiet for a moment. If she told him the entire truth, the curse could never be broken. But there was a small kernel she could share, as long as he never learned what the curse actually did to her, and as long as he never saw her night form. A fairy, she said eventually. A fairy. I was small, younger than I can properly remember. I was in the woods where I shouldn't have been, and I frightened it or offended it. I don't even know what I did, the kind of thing a child does without meaning anything. And it cursed you for that. She managed a thin smile. It's done. She opened the book in her lap before he could ask what the curse actually was. There's no use dwelling on it. He watched her a moment longer. She could feel the question behind his eyes, but he did not probe, and Elara loved him a little more for the thing he chose not to do. Thank you, she said. Their hands brushed again. For a brief instant she felt something that did not belong to her, warmth, gratitude. Before she could understand it, Theron quickly pulled his hand away and the feeling disappeared. Her heart raced. The sensation had been so clear, as though his emotions had leaked into her through that single point of contact. She told herself it was impossible, yet she could not shake the memory of that warmth. One afternoon she was helping him from the chair to a blanket spread beneath the oak. It was slow work. She supported most of his weight, one arm around his back, the other holding his hand. Their bodies remained pressed together as she carefully lowered him down, and suddenly she felt his gratitude for her care mixed with something heavier. Sorrow. He felt like a burden. The realization pierced something in her chest. "You are not a burden," she said. Theron looked at her, startled. "What?" She froze. She had answered something he had never said aloud. "I'm sorry, it's only that she hesitated, then decided on honesty. "Sometimes when we touch, I feel something. It's as though I can tell how you feel, not perfectly, just impressions of emotions that aren't mine." Theron said nothing. His expression had gone carefully blank in a way that made her chest tighten. "You don't look that surprised," she said. He kept his face turned from her. "What makes you say that?" "You didn't deny it, for a start." He remained silent, staring at the grass. Elara's breath caught. "So it is true." Theron's jaw tightened. "I didn't think you would experience it," he confessed. "Experience what?" "Nothing," he exhaled slowly, shoulders sagging. "There is something I should have told you." Her heart leapt. Finally he was going to explain. But instead he said, "Cale has written to us." She blinked, thrown by the sudden shift. "What?" Theron met her eyes. "The investigation has identified the family responsible for the poisoning." Her stomach dropped. "Who?" She saw something like pity in his expression. "It was Lara's family." Elara struggled to process it. "My uncle did this," she whispered. "It seems so." His face was grim. "With you gone, there would be nothing keeping Cale and Lyra apart. He retakes the crown, marries his lady love, and her family has the throne they've been scheming after for 2 generations. He cannot simply take his crown back." "Cale has enormous support," Theron contradicted her quietly. "Half the court built their futures around his reign. A good many of them still think of him as the rightful king. And that has only grown more dangerous now that I'm," he glanced down at the chair, "like this." "You are the king, Theron." "A kingdom cannot be ruled by a king in a chair." His voice had gone bitter. "You nearly died, and at the time I could still walk." He looked at his own hands. "I should never have allowed him to abdicate." "Well, I'm glad you did," Elara interrupted. He looked at her, startled. She reached for his hand, no longer caring about the strange sensation that would follow. "You have no idea how grateful I am that he abdicated," she said, "because it meant I got to marry you." The truth of it settled over her as she spoke. Cale was impulsive, superficial, and vain, but Theron was kind. He made her laugh. He took care of her. For a moment neither spoke. Through the contact between their hands she felt his emotions rush through her, warmth, longing, and beneath both, guilt, cutting guilt. "Our marriage has not been consummated," Theron said, breaking the silence. Elara blinked, completely thrown. "What?" His hand remained in hers, though his expression had closed slightly. "If Cale wanted his crown back, you could still return to him. You could remain queen." Each word seemed to cost him. "You could have the rightful king at your side, as was originally planned." She felt as though she had been slapped. "That is the last thing I want." Through their joined hands she felt his sorrow deepen. He tried to pull away. She tightened her grip. "Besides, Cale would not want me," she shrugged. "He made that perfectly clear, so you are stuck with me, I'm afraid." The moment she said it, she felt his relief, immediate and powerful, flooding through the connection. Then, almost as quickly, that relief was smothered by more guilt. She could not understand why. "Why are you speaking about this?" she asked. "Do you want to divorce me?" "No," Theron replied, and the certainty of it stilled her. Their eyes met. Her heart was racing. She could see the flecks of gold in his eyes, could count his eyelashes. His gaze dropped to her mouth, and she felt an answering flutter low in her stomach. Then she noticed the window behind him. The sun was setting. Elara jerked back as though burned. I have to go." Theron looked startled. "Go." She was already retreating toward the house, pulse thundering in her ears. "I'm sorry." She left before he could stop her, running back through the corridors toward her room, regret burning in her throat. She had been so close to kissing him, to finally crossing that invisible line they had been dancing around for weeks. And she had run. Just like always. Chapter 8. Elara reached her room just as the last of the sunlight disappeared beyond the horizon. The transformation took her the way it always did, skin smoothing, features shifting, hair lengthening and darkening until it fell in glossy waves past her shoulders. She stood in the center of the floor until it finished, breathing hard from the run and from everything she had left behind beneath the oak tree. She had been so close. So close to kissing him. So close to finally crossing the invisible line they had been dancing around for weeks. And she had run. Again. She walked to the mirror the way she did every night and forced herself to look. Dark hair, fine bones, a face lit from somewhere within, clean, striking, the kind of face a person did not forget. No one who saw her now would ever believe she was the same woman who walked the gardens by day. For years she had believed this form was the one thing that might save her. The fairy's curse was supposed to break if someone fell sincerely in love with her daytime appearance. If Theron could love that version of her, truly love her despite what the curse did to her face during the day, the magic would release her. She would be free, she would remain beautiful. That was what she had always wanted. Wasn't it? She sighed and rested her fingertips against the cool glass. She was beginning to hate this face in the mirror. Not because it was ugly, it was the opposite, but because she hated that she had to hide it from the one person she wanted to share everything with. For the first time, she seriously considered showing him the truth. Doing so would endanger the curse ever breaking. The rules were clear. Theron was supposed to fall sincerely in love with her daytime appearance. If he saw how beautiful she became after sunset, she might never know whether he truly loved all of her. He would know her real face was beautiful, and so the magic might never release her. She could remain trapped like this forever, unattractive by day, beautiful by night, never whole in either form. But Elara found herself wondering whether that mattered anymore. Because this could end right now. She could show him. She could walk down the corridor right now and let him see. No more running from the sunset. No more excuses murmured while his face fell. It would cost her the curse. If he saw how beautiful she became at night, he could never love her day form without knowing there was another. But she did not care. If she could have him, even only halfway, that was a life worth living. They could be together. Wasn't that worth more than breaking the curse? The question lodged itself in her chest like a thorn. That night Elara could not sleep. She lay in the dark, turning the choice over and over. Show him and risk remaining cursed forever. Keep hiding and risk losing the only man who had ever looked at her daylight face without flinching. By the time the first gray light touched the window, she had still not decided. Exhaustion finally pulled her under for a few shallow hours. She woke the next morning feeling oddly light on her feet. She rose and began getting ready for breakfast. A knock sounded at the door. The maid, Kathy, entered carrying fresh linens. She took 3 steps into the room, then froze completely. The linens tumbled from her arms. "Is everything all right?" Elara asked. Kathy was gaping at her. "Who?" Her eyes went wide. "Who are you?" Elara frowned. "What are you talking about, Kathy? It's me." The maid stared, mouth opening and closing like a fish. Elara felt the first flutter of something strange in her chest. Her gaze drifted to the mirror across the room. She walked toward it slowly, heart beginning to race. She looked at her reflection. And she looked like herself. Flawless skin. Perfect features. Dark hair falling in glossy waves. Elara's breath caught. She looked outside. The sun was up, streaming golden through her window. She looked at the mirror again, then outside, then back at the mirror. And then the truth crashed over her like a wave. "He loves me." Joy exploded through her chest so violently she pressed both hands over her mouth to contain the laugh that wanted to burst free. He loved her. Her husband, her kind, stubborn, wonderful husband, loved her. The curse was broken. This proved it. The curse had broken because Theron had fallen in love with her despite everything. Tears pricked her eyes even as she smiled. She had to see him, had to show him what she really looked like and watch understanding dawn in those beautiful blue eyes. He was going to be so pleased. "I have to go," she said breathlessly, already moving toward the door. Behind her, Kathy made a confused sound, but Elara was already gone, practically running through the corridors, heart pounding with pure, dazzling hope. She could not wait to see his face. Chapter 9. Elara burst through the door of Theron's study, breathless and beaming, her whole body thrumming with joy. "Theron." He looked up from the papers spread across his desk and frowned briefly, polite and distant, the expression one used with strangers. Yes, he asked. He did not recognize her. Elara laughed, the sound bright and disbelieving. She moved closer, heart racing. It's me, Theron, it's me. I was cursed. You see how I looked before? It wasn't really me, but to break the curse you had to. Theron's expression shifted. He tried to push himself up from the chair, muscles tensing as though preparing for a threat. His arms trembled with the effort. He could not rise. Who are you? His voice was sharp now, protective. Where's Elara? The joy in her chest flickered, but she pushed forward. Theron. She took a step closer, voice soft. It's me, I'm Elara. He looked at her, really looked for the first time, then she saw him scenting the air. His nostrils flared slightly, an unconscious gesture she had noticed many times before. Recognition dawned in his eyes. Elara smiled. Finally he understood. But then the color drained from his face. He said nothing. He only stared at her as though she were a ghost. Her confidence began to crumble. This was not right. He should be happy. Surprised, certainly, but happy. A fairy cursed me when I was a child, she explained quickly. To look, well, how I used to look during the day and only like myself at night. The only way to break it was to have someone fall in love with me despite my looks. She tried to smile. Which is why I couldn't tell you, you see, because if you'd known I truly looked like this, then the despite my looks part wouldn't have been sincere. You'd have known I didn't really look that way. So. Theron shook his head slowly. You, the word seemed to die in his throat. Elara's nervousness grew. It doesn't matter, she said. It means you love me because the curse broke. She hesitated, suddenly uncertain. You do love me, right? Theron stared at her. Yes, he said at last, but so quietly it made her heart sink. Oh, her smile fell away. I thought you'd be happy. He caught himself. She watched him visibly gather his composure. Forgive me, of course I'm. This is wonderful, Elara. He sounded sincere. I'm glad your curse is gone. This is truly wonderful news. She beamed at him, relieved. She opened her mouth to tell him she loved him too, to close the distance between them. I think we should get a divorce, Theron said. Elara's face fell. What? He looked sad. We haven't consummated the marriage, he said, which is just as I'd thought for the best, because now you can cleanly marry Kale. Kale, she exclaimed, disbelieving. I cannot walk, Elara. He pointed it out as though that had anything to do with it. Not yet, she said, but you. We don't know that, he cut her off gently but firmly. The court doesn't know that. Most people were already eager for Kale to return. He can't just return, she interrupted. He can and he will. Theron's jaw was set. It's better that way. This whole thing will have taught him a valuable lesson. He can't just abandon his responsibilities on a whim. People rely on him. I still don't see why we have to get a divorce. Theron stared at her as if she had said something incomprehensible. Elara, you were promised a king, a kingdom, and you can still have one. She felt her stomach drop, felt anger beginning to burn through the shock. You planned this, didn't you? She said. You were worried this would happen, that you'd have to give up the crown, which is why you never. Why you pushed me away. Theron lowered his gaze. Confirmation was written in every line of his body. Our marriage can be annulled, he said quietly, and nothing will stop you from marrying Kale. She opened her mouth to protest, but he continued before she could speak. Think about it, Elara, you can be queen. Kale doesn't want me, she pointed out. He will. Theron looked at her then, taking in her beautiful face, her perfect features, and she saw something break in his expression. Now that your curse is broken, you know he will. The meaning behind his words settled over her like ice water. Now that you're beautiful, Kale will want you. And the court will accept you. Disgust rose sharp and bitter in her throat, followed immediately by fury. Well, I don't want him, she snapped. Not one bit. Let him take the crown in his court, but he will not have me. Theron frowned, confused. Why would I want someone who will not consider me if I'm not beautiful enough, she exclaimed, when I can have someone who loves me for me and not for how I look. He looked startled. I know you love me, Elara said, taking a step closer. That is of no consequence. How can you say that? The words burst from her, raw with emotion. How can you say that, Theron, when it means everything to me? You showed me kindness when no one else did. You're in a chair because you protected me. Her voice cracked. Tears threatened. You love me sincerely and you broke my curse. I don't understand how you can even think I could ever divorce you after this. Elara, you didn't even choose this marriage, he pointed out. You were forced into it, but you have a choice now. Right, she cut him off. Well, I choose you. The words hung in the air between them, absolute and final. She took another step closer, closing the distance until she stood directly before his chair. I will not walk away from the man who wanted me when no one thought I was worth wanting. You don't owe me anything, Theron said fiercely. I know that, you stubborn man, she replied. I choose you because I love you. He stared at her, shock written across every line of his face. I do, Elara continued. I love you, you are my husband, we took vows, my place is by your side, not at court with that foolish king. Theron looked as though he had never considered this possibility. And then Elara felt everything. The connection between them, the one that let her sense his emotions when they touched, suddenly flooded open without any physical contact at all. She felt his stupor at her words, his mind struggling to process what she had said, his guilt eating away at him like poison, his sense of worthlessness, the bone-deep belief that he did not deserve her. And beneath it all, woven through everything, his love. Elara's eyes widened as it washed over her. You do deserve it, she whispered. Then she leaned down and kissed him. Chapter 10. For a heartbeat, Theron did not move. Then his hands came up to cup her face, gentle, almost reverent, and he kissed her back with everything he had. Elara felt his emotions wash over her in a flood. Love, longing, relief so intense it made her dizzy. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she realized she could sense his presence like a warm glow just beneath her skin, constant and steady. Can you feel it too? She breathed. Theron nodded, wonder written across his face. Yes, it's the bond. The bond? He smiled, the first real smile she had seen from him since she burst into the room. A mating bond. My wolf recognized you as my mate. It's been forming between us for weeks, every time we touched, but now it's complete. Tears pricked her eyes. A mate, he was her mate. Well then, she said, voice unsteady with emotion and something brighter, you can't just push your mate away. Theron laughed low and rough. No, he said, I suppose not. And then they kissed again. This time Elara felt his love for her like sunlight, warm and real and unshakable. Outside the study window, spring was turning the world green again. Inside, a king who could not yet walk and a queen who no longer had to hide began the rest of their lives, knowing the court still waited and the true battle for the throne was only beginning. But for the first time, neither of them faced it alone. Epilogue. They returned to the capital in the spring because Kale was getting married. Riding through those gates again, Elara felt nothing. The palace had once been her prison, now it was only stones and old walls. The carriage stopped. Half the court had gathered to watch the guests arrive. Theron opened his door himself and stepped down on his own 2 feet, unassisted. The healers had been wrong. A startled murmur rippled through the crowd at the sight. He turned back and held out his hand. Then the murmur stopped entirely. Because Elara had taken his hand and stepped down beside him, every eye in the courtyard fixed on her. Who is she? Someone said. I've never seen her before. She's stunning. Theron drew her hand into the crook of his arm and walked her forward, unhurried. They passed every face that had ever laughed at her, every noble who had whispered behind their hands. The crowd parted, still staring. At the altar, King Kale stood beside his bride. He had been listening to the ceremony, half bored when the whispers reached him. He glanced toward the aisle and froze. Elara felt his stare and others like it and kept her expression perfectly pleasant. They took their seats at the front. Finally, Kale could bear it no longer. He crossed the hall toward them, leaving his new bride with barely a word. He stopped in front of Elara and bowed deeper than strictly necessary. My lady, his voice was smooth, charming. I don't believe we've been introduced. Elara tilted her head slightly, her smile pleasant and cool. Theron's hand settled over hers, warm and possessive. You do know her, he said quietly. You've known her for months. Kale's confusion deepened. Then Elara spoke. It's me, your majesty. Elara, the color drained from Kale's face. That's not. It is, she said simply. The shock rippled outward, noble to noble, until the entire hall buzzed with it. Kale stood rooted to the spot, staring at her as though she had risen from the grave. Congratulations on your wedding, your majesty, Elara said pleasantly. Your bride is lovely. He gaped, speechless. Elara and Theron took their seats. His hand settled over hers, warm and sure. The court that had once laughed at her could not look away now. Kale had his crown, his court, his throne. but not the bride he had been promised. Elara felt Theron's thumb brush across her knuckles and felt the bond between them glow steady and warm. They had each been no one's first choice, but they had chosen each other. And that was everything.